What they did was not simply imitating the dances, the bodily movements of violent protest. Rather, they dissected the movements and translated the resulting elements into a choreography in which a single dancer may incorporate gestures of both sides, sometimes within a single flow of movement. And then all four dancers would reassemble and in a more obvious or recognizable way stage bodily movements that, if only remotely, bring to mind the original clashes. So I show you now this part.
To je samo malo dima, dođite natrag, molim vas. Idemo.
we don't have time. I would otherwise show you also when they start dancing together. We can now change back to the computer, please. So now some might object that this work, which is if we talk about political artistic practices that sort of have to do with the conditions of political acting that I just presented, some might object that this work, which is basically a two-channel video installation, has nothing to do with art or with art in public sphere or art and performance in public space, and it is, as a piece, of course, situated within the walls of an institution, the walls of an art institution. Nevertheless, it remains of interest for two reasons which are obvious. First of all, the piece should not be seen so much as a political intervention in its own right, I assume, than as a reflection upon the conditions of protest within a violently anti-gay, anti-lesbian environment. In this sense, it is quite telling that Grubic approaches the events through the very format that was obviously lacking in the original event, even though one would have expected it in the case of pride parades, namely dancing in this carnivalesque sense for which these pride parades are actually famous for. Of course, it is patently clear while dance was lacking, there was no reason to dance while under physical attack. But Grubic decided to restage the events precisely by means of that which had remained symptomatically absent. However, by being reintroduced into the picture, dance takes on a completely different meaning. It becomes an expression of terroristic violence, the violence of the fascist counter-protesters, a violence sublimated, if you wish, or deconstructed by Grubic and the dancers into an artistic form. Therefore, it is more than appropriate that the title of the work, East Side Story, refers to a musical film, West Side Story, well known for its celebrated dance scenes, in which, in particular, acts of violence between street gangs were sublimated into a grandiose choreography. Second, Grubic's quasi-resistance movement, and he framed it like this, a couple of people forming a resistance movement in a violently anti-gay sphere. This quasi-resistance movement of him and the four dancers returned to the public sites where the original events had occurred. Not only was the video taken on the streets of Zagreb and Belgrade, but Grubic decided to have all rehearsals on the spot. Stretching over a period of 2 months, the choreography was developed right there in the public sphere. The passers-by would thus be confronted with someone has called it a temporary monument, supposed to bring back the memories of the TV images. So East Side Story to some degree was a performative intervention into public space. But the question we have to ask, and this has nothing to do with the quality of this piece, which I think is great, but still we have to ask, did it create a public sphere in the political sense? And it goes without saying that no reenactment, a reenactment is not and cannot be the real thing, obviously. It is not the event itself. At best, it can initiate a process of reflection which then might again turn into political activation. In this case, the performance in the streets of Zagreb and Belgrade did not fully meet the criteria I guess are necessary for a public space in the political sense to emerge. The performance did not really block the circulation of traffic, perhaps it slightly distracted it. No conflict, as much as I can say, did emerge from the performance, at least no collectivizable conflict, because whenever a real conflict occurs, it tends to spread. It tends to spread for some time as it can be collectivized. That is to say, more and more people start affiliating themselves with the cause of the conflict. The dances, as much as they remained individual dances even while dancing together, did not generate a collective, but rather a singular plural body. As we will see in the next example, there is also the possibility of a more collectivist dancing body. These dances, however, acted in concert, as Arendt would have it, but they did not act as or within a political collective. For this reason, the artists did not and didn't need to develop a larger and long-term political strategy, which would nevertheless be necessary to achieve a goal or the goals the protest movements wishes to achieve. So subtract all these political dimensions from the performance, collectivity, conflict, and blockade, what remains is pure embodiment, the bodily reenactment of a political event from the past, which, as bodily reenactment, pure and simple, is not political in itself because it lacks all the other criteria necessary in order to meaningfully speak about politics and a political event in the first place. Again, I don't mean this as a form of criticism of it, to make it clear, not a form of criticism of that piece, but as simply a structural comment concerning the political criteria of what makes public action actually political. Now let us move to the next example in order to see what it takes for an artistic intervention to actually make the passage into politics. The double dimension of dancing politics through protest, choreography and dance is reactivated in many performances of the Israeli collective public movement founded in 2006 by the dancer and choreographer Dana Yahalomi and the visual artist Omer Krieger, and led by Yahalomi alone since 2011. The name of the group refers, on the one hand, to the ritualized choreographies of a nation-state public, and on the other, to the political or protest movements of a potential counter-public. In other words, to state choreographies and to protest choreographies. What is of importance is the fact that these choreographies will always be inscribed into the bodily knowledge of individuals. As Yahalomi puts it, politics exists within our bodies as an often dormant knowledge. In their performances, these unconscious incorporations of the state are very often reassembled into dreamlike choreographic sequences. Now, for instance, in their performance, Also Thus, entitled Also Thus, in 2009, the group staged a fictitious state ritual in front of the fascist architecture of the Berlin Olympia Stadium. This ritual, which included mock violence, marching and military exercise, and a car crash, or maybe you don't know exactly, maybe a terrorist attack against a car of the type used by German politicians, ended with an Israeli folk dance, and the audience joining it. In this public movement performance, as in some others, a quasi-Zionist occupation takes place of an anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic historical setting, a sort of overwriting, which nevertheless leaves visible the background. However, public movements do not take an explicit political position, not even a Zionist one. Perhaps one should rather speak about their deconstruction of Zionism as the dominant state choreography of Israel. As in the original Derridian sense, this involves both an element of destruction and an element of construction. With obvious reference to the constructive dimension, performances of public movement have also been described by Yahalomi as pre-enactments. They do not imitate an actual event in the past, but engage in the paradoxical enterprise of restaging an event that has not yet occurred. For instance, a future state that will have implemented the rituals preformed by public movement. Sometimes these preformances, as we may call them, can assume a disruptive rather than a ceremonial quality. In these disruptive cases, what is announced by the intervention is not a future state, but perhaps a future protest. In their 2006 guerrilla performance, How Long Is Now, the group blocked crossroads in Israeli cities by performing a circle dance to a popular Israeli song from the 1970s, Od Lo Ahavti Dai, the same song that, by the way, ended this ritual, the Also Thus ritual. After having blocked traffic for 2.5 minutes, the dances disappear and traffic can continue circulating. So I can unfortunately only show you a very bad mobile phone video from 2006, which you find on their website, but I think it will do. Now, to understand this intervention, one has to know that Israeli folk dance does not in the slightest emerge from an age-old tradition. Of course, round dances and circle dances belong to the cultural heritage of the Mediterranean region. I just started the presentation with one of them, and of Southeast Europe. Yet modern Israeli folk dance has its roots in the 1940s, when the Israelis were forced to create a new synthetic culture for heterogeneous groups of immigrants. For this purpose, Israeli folk dance did not only integrate choreographic elements of highly diverse traditions, it also became very much part of popular music production. Every new Israeli pop hit was immediately outfitted with a choreography, which was then passed on in dancing classes. Thus, folk dance in Israel has nothing to do with what the Germans call Brauchtum, an appalling term, but is better described as an enormous multiplication of fashion dances. Among these hundreds of songs, Od Lo Ahavti Dai, with the accompanying choreography by Yankele Levi, which is a relative simple choreography, has proven to be one of the most popular ones. It's probably because every Israeli child learns the choreography, in kindergarten if you wish, that public movement chose the song. In this sense, Israel's state choreography is expressed through communal dancing and registered by the bodily knowledge of its citizens. Because it is universal in a sense and individual knowledge, every passerby can potentially join in and become part of the circle. By using this dance in order to block the crossroad, a dance symbolizing the communitarian closure of society, because it is a round dance, but also, of course, the attempt to gain courage and solidarity within a fundamentally hostile environment. So, by using this dance in order to block the crossroad, a dance symbolizing communitarian closure of society is reappropriated and used to disturb the public order of this very society. Most of the criteria I try to develop are thus met. How long is now? This performance is a collective and collectivizable action by which a public, in a strong sense, is curved out of urban space. This is achieved through blocking the circulation of traffic with dancing bodies, and yet the passage to politics, in a strict sense, does not occur. Without doubt, the irritation produced by the event has the potential to remind passers-by of the micro-political inscription of state choreographies in their own individual bodies. Such reactivation of bodily knowledge can have something political, but more in a critical or analytical sense rather than in the sense of protest politics. And to the extent that it remains an art performance, the meaning and the goal of the intervention can very well remain in the dark for most of its witnesses. In fact, public movement explicitly say that they do not adhere to the for-against paradigm. And this is exactly the point where we realize that a decisive element is missing. An actual conflict that would force everyone to position him or herself on this or the other side of a political antagonism. Now, in summer 2011, such an antagonism broke out in Israel when tents were being planted in the center of Tel Aviv and other cities. Starting with a call of a single student, social protests against high living and housing expenses grew to the point where Israel witnessed the largest political demonstration in history. In the course of the protests, public movement took up their intervention, this one, and offered this format to the protesters. So again and again, dozens of activists would assemble on different crossroads in order to block traffic for 2.5 minutes to the music of Od Lo Ahavti Dai. In so doing, they actualized a conflict much wider than simply a clash with angry car drivers. Such a momentary clash referred to the wider line of political conflict drawn by the social protesters all over Israel at that point of time. By offering the demonstrators a new and easily collectivizable protest format, the original guerrilla performance was turned by public movement from an artistic intervention into a political one. The latter actualized what was only announced as a future possibility by the former pre-enactment. Or to put it differently, how long is now danced by the protesters in 2011 was not an artistic reenactment of a political event, as Grubisch's East Side Story was. It was inversely a political reenactment of an artistic event. And I want to show you now one of those protests in the center of the street from Tel Aviv in 2011. Of course, to reenact an artistic event politically only became possible on the condition that a larger antagonism emerged in society, which was not in the hands of public movement. So therefore, what we have to do, we really encounter in an event, a completely asubjective event that happened. We should think of this antagonism, however, as an objective condition of protest, not as something that can be produced intentionally. And yet these objective conditions have to be met by artistic practices in order for a conflict to pass from the latent to the manifest, if you wish. If this worked out so well in the case of How Long Is Now, then because the emancipatory potential of Zionist culture created long ago in the kibbutzim and watered down to pop cultural folk dance was recreated within today's street protest. And if people joined in, then they did because an essential dimension of political acting was addressed, the joyous experience resulting from the virtuosity of the performance as such.